Wheel of Genre, the show for listeners who've seen The Boogeyman and laughed. Right now, we're reading every short story in Harlan Ellison's anthology, Dangerous Visions, including this one right here, Fritz Leiber's Gonna Roll the Bones. I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested in SF folding in genres that you wouldn't normally see with it, like the Western or the Tall Tale or whatever this story is trying to do.
I'm Bob. I'm interested in the style of this story. We've seen kind of full, very florid, everything goes into this story kind of style before, and we've seen it with Philip Jose Farmer. Didn't like it then. I'm curious what we think about it this time.
What happened in the story, Bob?
This is a crazy story, Zach. So this is Fritz Leiber, and I've always wanted to read Fritz Leiber. He's an extremely accomplished horror and science fiction writer, so this is very exciting. But it is a learning curve, I feel like, reading this story because his style is so weird. However, we have a guy who's got nothing really going for him. He's a miner, like goes down to the mines to dig, and he wants to go and roll the bones. But rolling the bones is going to a club, I guess, a casino. He's going to a casino. It's a little bit Ian Fleming. When he does this, though, the people there are quite strange. They're almost like characters out of hell. Strange stuff is going on, and he doesn't really fit in. He is someone with no money, and these are people betting tens of thousands of dollars. And as he goes, he tells us, I'm actually really, really good at throwing things. He's like a hobbit. He's really good at throwing things. He does that all day in the mines. Now, when he's doing this, he finds out that is he the dealer, Zach? I don't really know how casinos work. Is he the dealer or the casino owner?
That's a really good question. Well, he was also playing. He was also throwing, so I couldn't tell if he was just someone seated at the table.
Can't a dealer play, though? Well, he maybe he's just someone seated at the table. He's called
but he was winning money, full disclosure, I've only been, I think a dealer earns money through their wage labor. I think their salary is how they get the money.
They're not there for fun. Okay, that makes more sense.
No. Should we go to more casinos so that we have a better
The answer here is we're really missing out on life. We need to stop reading the science fiction. Well, so this guy who may or may not be making his own money he wants to join in because he sees our main guy is really good at this. He's really good at throwing things. And he says, look, I'm going to throw things. They're playing craps, so they're throwing dice. This guy, though, when he throws and the dice just hover. They don't turn over at all. It's very strange. So our guy starts to think, I don't trust that. They test it. Everything is fine. Later, he throws the dice into the man's eyes. And he just spits them out. Eventually, he leaves and is unscathed after being beaten brutally. It is a weird nightmare twist of a story. Am I missing some key things, Zach, or is that the gist?
Well, the man he's playing against is the personification of death. He has eyes like black holes, gaunt, aristocratic cheeks, and narrow, but a somewhat flat nose. And he's wearing a coat that is a shimmering, elegant pillar of black satin with jet buttons, with an upturned collar of dull plush black as the darkest cellar. So wearing all black, and he's scary. And then there seems to be some heat emanating from the table, which is like...
Oh, the table.
Basically, the table is like a hole into hell. I like your comparison to Ian Fleming in a James Bond novel, because what Bond novels do is they can make any game, poker, baccarat, any card or dice game, feel like the most important thing and feel very, very high stakes. And with this one, most of the story is taken up by the back and forth of him winning and losing. When he loses all of his money, Death says, Joe Slattermill, on my part, I will venture all of my winnings of tonight and throw in the world and everything in it for a side bet. You will wager your life, and on the side, your soul. You roll the dice. What's your pleasure? So we have a Faustian bargain, a deal with the devil.
Makes me think of when Josh said Jekyll and Hyde is only about drinking. This also feels like it's only about gambling. You know, if it's a Faustian bargain, this guy's trying to get over his gambling obsession. He has a great opportunity to walk away with a few $1,000s, almost 7,000, 8,000 up in winnings. And he could go back and his family would be happy, but he just throws again because he knows he'll get laughed at.
Yeah, there's an element of pride and hubris here. He could have walked away a long time ago, but for some reason he feels like he has to beat death. And in the end, he doesn't beat death at the table as much as he literally tries to beat up death. He leaps across the table and pounces him. And, it ends with basically him having taken a bite out of death's skull. So the story ends with him leaving this casino type place. It's called the Boneyard, which I really liked. But it's one of those classic endings where he walks out of it and then he turns around and it's an empty building. And where there used to be a door that swung wide open, it's a padlocked, locked steel door. It's just like a classic image of like a haunted house, a haunted den that when they leave, it was never there at all. But he has a piece of death's skull in his mouth because I guess he took a bite out of it and he spits it out.
Like
and it's a piece of his wife's. Yeah. It's a piece of his wife's bread that she was baking at the start of the episode. And then the poker chips that were in his pocket are now communion wafers. It's, it's very strange, and I didn't quite know what to make of those images. What did you get out of the end of this?
Yes, the communion wafers, I'm not sure if there's some symbolism going on there. I think maybe this guy just finds out, oh, I wasn't there at all. I just happened to have communion wafers in my pocket. But I think a very important part for Fritz Leiber in this, when he's in his afterword, he's saying, I wanted to write about the boogeyman, and I wanted to write a tall tale, like the American tradition of Paul Bunyan or something like that. I want to write a tall tale. So I feel like that is the experience. We're going in and we're going into an experience that Joe Slattermill kind of has to believe he experienced because he was there. He has the, even though it's now bread, he felt like he was biting someone's skull. He has these experiences. He burned his hand when he reaches into that hellhole because there's like a laser over the top of it. So he's hurt his hand. But then he comes out and he's got nothing to show for it except for some communion wafers and bread. It's a tall tale. But what do you think about the boogeyman aspect? Well, first, what do you think about the tall tale? Is that important, I guess, to include a tall tale in science fiction? Have you seen anything like that? We saw a fairy tale where we had a pattern of threes earlier in Dangerous Visions. But now we have the idea of a tall tale. Why use outside genres to not compete, but why use them to aid in writing science fiction?
Yeah, I mean, I love when people use outside genres to write their primary genre. I guess my only question is why use the tall tale? I mean, it's okay to make like a literary experiment, but I'm wondering, what does it do to use a tall tale in science fiction? And like, frankly, the more I think about it, I'm not even sure how much science fiction this is. This just seems like more tall tale than anything else. And this is a classic case of a story. And we see this in other stories. We saw this in like the past 2 or 3 stories where they have a perfectly fine science fiction narrative, but then the details of it will be even more science fiction. So like they'll look out the window and see floating blimps from Mars, but the plot has nothing to do with that. Right. It's just like, it's just like little Rococo details that are being flourished in. And this story could have been set in the 1840s. And it doesn't necessarily add or take away anything from the plot to have it set in the far future. So then my question is, why is it set in the far future?
Why is it set in the far future? Yeah, does it feel like a story that's being shoehorned? I really like the point where you said that they were mentioning starships. They come out of nowhere. They're quite interesting. Like they are part of the style. But for one example, here's a quote. It says, instantly, Mr. Bones froze and the hissing stopped faster than that of a meteor prick in a self-sealing space steel. Whoa. Suddenly we're on a spaceship with that simile. my question for you is, does it feel shoehorned? Because we've kind of figured out how these other stories are dangerous visions, even if we had to argue about it and figure out why are they a threat, or why are they pushing golden age science fiction off of a pedestal and saying this is real, this is new age science fiction. I feel like this is not doing that. Do you feel like there's any reason to include it in this collection other than, oh, I need to include Fritz Leiber, and then Fritz Leiber thinking, oh, I need to include some weird science fiction similes? Or is there something at the heart of this?
I think you might hit the nail on the head there, in the sense of feeling like Fritz Leiber needed to be included and Fritz Leiber feeling like it needed to be more SF. I mean, neither of us have read any other Fritz Leiber. I do know he invented the term sword and sorcery. But that's about as much as I know about him, unfortunately. So I'd really like to know what the rest of his work is like. I guess I just feel like if the form of this story isn't going to give me a great takeaway, the form isn't making me say, wow, science fiction with tall tale, then what I need this story to be doing is to have the overt content of it, the message of the story, be giving me something to chew on. But I'm actually not, I'm finding it extremely elusive to find meaning, like a meaning that I could put in my back pocket and walk away and tell people about with this one. Because, I mean, what we have is a man who, enters a haunted casino, essentially, rolls the dice with death, manages to get away, and then he goes home to his wife. It says he takes a long way home around the world. But it's almost like a David Lynch film, in the sense of, like, there's really iconic imagery here. Imagery you may have seen before. The game playing death, for example. Death playing chess, death playing... Bill and Teddy's playing hopscotch, I think. But you get what I'm saying. It's not easy for me to say this is what it meant. And I'm not even sure if Fritz Leiber knows what it means, or if he's trying to do that. But yeah.
So old Joe Slattermill is not Max von Sydow for you. What do you think about the style? I'm thinking maybe that is why it could be included, or that's why it's a dangerous vision. We saw with Philip Jose Farmer when he wrote the Riders of the Purple Wage. And we didn't really like that. That was obtuse, purposely obtuse. And I thought that was what was happening in this story at first. I wrote one thing down on my line as just deliberately obtuse, because it says, gradually the midget music got raucous as a bunny hug for grizzly bears and loud as a polka for elephants, while the glow became a riot of gas flares and flambeaux and corpse blue mercury tubes. It just goes on. But I eventually start to like it because it is fun in a way, and it's kind of a participatory fun, whereas Philip Jose Farmer was way in your face. Look at what I can do. But one element that I thought was quite cool, earlier you were talking about how it's similar to Ian Fleming, being, wow, gambling, there's so much writing on it. It's not just your money, it's also the entire country. Here it's your life because you're playing against death. But it reminded me too of when Fleming indulges in surrealism, which he does pretty much every book. When he's playing at the card table, whatever they're playing, blackjack, he starts to describe the green of the card table becoming sea foam, and then the people's hands are like crabs scuttling over the sea foam. So he occasionally does go into surrealism, but this story felt like it was Ian Fleming only doing surrealism, and it just happened to be packaged in a casino. Is there anything redeeming about this style, or how did you feel about it? Was it deliberately obtuse, or was it fun for you?
Well, I think that I like that comparison of, like, Fleming's surrealist touches, but if the whole thing was kind of, slightly surrealist. But I think for me, what makes Fleming successful is that the gambling scenes are part of a larger action and a larger sequence. They have a context that makes them interesting and important. Whereas this is just a short story, and it's a short story that pretty much only takes place at the table. So it's much harder for it to feel Like, to me, it feels like a single scene of a movie when I want the whole film. Like, I need the whole film. And I think that this kind of like, as a tall tale, it's really cool. You know, it's cool to have this kind of like heightened story, I guess you could say, that, you know, you can either believe or not believe. But I need it to be wrapped. I need it to have a wrapper, a narrative wrapper, for it to be more compelling for me. Because otherwise I'm just left with a tall tale, with just a story that I say, okay.
You got nothing but wafers in your pockets. You're coming away from this story feeling duped. It was all a fake haunted casino. I've got a weird theory. I'm going to throw it at you. I don't think it's a really valid theory. No, it's great. That's what I'll say. I'll say it. What do you think? Because there are these weird little science fiction similes. You know, some of the writing style is from science fiction, and it's a tall tale. If you're picking this up and expecting to go through science fiction, the story we read last week, if you can help me remember the title, but the plot is a boy, when he's like 3 years old, 4 years old, just happens to go to Mars. Everyone comes and says, wow, that's so interesting that you traveled to another planet. But then it's structured like a fairy tale. However, at the end, it turns into a kind of a tall tale because no one cares. So it's like he did something amazing, and now who cares? But here, he's gone and done something he can never really explain to anyone. No one will ever believe him. And it reminds me of that experience of science fiction, where you are going to go to another planet. You're going to see the future. Then you're going to come back and tell people about the future, and you just can't. So in that way, it's a dangerous vision because he's seen something else. And there's an expectation for us of where we want that full story. We want the whole science fiction world explained to us. And now we're never going to get that. We're just going to get similes where science fiction kind of interrupts or suddenly appears like a phantom here and there in the story.
Well, I think this story does explain itself in terms of what's going on for 95% of it. I think it's only the end where the story doesn't explain itself. Once he leaves and all these metamorphoses start happening, Death's skull becomes bread. Poker chips become communion wafers. He suddenly decides he wants to go home and be with his wife, who previously he had a strained relationship with. But he takes the long way around the world, whatever that means.
Right.
It just, all of these, if it was a realist story all the way through with one tall tale element, which is the kind of haunted casino, the casino of life and death, then that's one thing. But we have a realist story, casino, and then at the end, a bunch of transformations, which we are led to believe actually happen. But then the story ends. So there's so many question marks at the end of this that it's hard for me to sink my teeth into it, I guess. I don't know. Do you need those transformations explained? Is it important? Oh, sorry.
I'm not saying that the transformations are not explained exactly. More like earlier you said, why did I read this? Or, what do I come away with after reading this story? Really, what was the point? What has been communicated to me? Like Philip K. Dick said in his story, it's a religion, man. I'm going to give you a vision that I've had and you're going to see God. This, what's his name? Harlan Ellison says, quote, in the introduction, quote, the Leiber-esque conception of the universe being unified by magic and science and superstition is in this story. So do you think having some sort of experience like that, is that purposeful? I guess if it's science fiction, you're expecting science fiction, you don't get that, but somehow you see magic and science and superstition all together in one. Is that something interesting? Does that represent how science fiction should evolve? Not just, are there secrets, but is there a point?
Well, if we're getting into like superstition and stuff like that, how is that any different than fantasy? I mean, why would science fiction need to go in a realm that's not science or fiction? You know what I mean? Like why? Like how could science fiction productively do any kind of mysticism? And I don't even think this is doing any kind of mysticism. Like it's not like Philip K. Dick is doing mysticism more than that because it's speculating about kind of the nature of these like godlike entities, in the previous one we read. But this isn't doing that. in the same way, because it doesn't elevate the death figure to be anything other than just death. It's not that death is this secret hidden cosmic principle of the world or whatever. It's like a very, it's like a very cliche image in the sense that like it's an image that we've seen before. We know well. We just read Faust 1 and 2. The person makes, a gamble. It's the whole Faustian thing. Or it's such like a common image of like making a bargain with the devil, or in this case with death. If you win, you get this. If you lose, I take your soul. So I don't know. I wouldn't, I don't know. I don't know, Bob. I struggle with it. I really do.
Yes, maybe if he was really going for a boogeyman, I think that's part of the superstition element is the boogeyman. And it might be more effective if it were more like the Shrike, where it is coming in for a reason, actually changing things in a bigger story. And here it's just one experience that is only a tall tale with little glimmering baubles of science fiction. There's no real point for the science fiction, maybe.
And I guess that is kind of the nature of the tall tale. If it's like a single encounter, like a really, a tall tale being like, I went fishing and I caught an amazing, huge monster fish, but I got away. I couldn't bring it home. Or I saw Bigfoot. There's an element of a tall tale involving a kind of like single encounter. And maybe if this story gave us too much about what it meant or who it was, or something about the world, then it would no longer be a tall tale. It needs to just be a kind of encounter where he goes there, enters in a different kind of space where he's gambling with death, and then leaves.
Yes, you don't want to make it too tall, which is bald in Chinese, too tall. Now, great. I thought it was a fun story, though. But yes, not exactly a dangerous vision.
Well, let's keep them coming. I think Fritz Leiber is one of those authors who we should definitely explore more and maybe read his full-length novels to see what he can do with these kind of like jarring scenes and see what happens if you put them in much more fleshed out and lengthy pieces of work. So that's something I look forward to exploring with you later. Yeah. Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.